The Ballad of Black Tom is a 2016 novella by Victor LaValle, and it's a retelling of an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Terror of Red Hook, but through the perspective of a young black man. So the original story by Lovecraft was published in Weird Tales in 1927, and is basically is Lovecraft at his most racist. It's the story of a detective called Malone recounting the story of Robert Suyam, a rich older man who's been apparently corrupted by the hybrid squalid residents of Red Hook, a community in Brooklyn, which is still there now, but at the time was I don't actually know what it is at the moment, but at the time, basically that's where all the immigrants were. That's where all the non-white immigrants were, and Lovecraft, who happened to be living in the general area at the time, walked through it and had whitey racist terror horror over the situation, and so he wrote a story about it, where you have Robert Sodiadam, who, oh my God, it's the intelligence of a white man, but taking the forbidden, horrid, gross lore of all these disgusting non-white people, and using it to call forth the nameless terrors that you get in H.P. Lovecraft stories. So the Ballad of Black Tom is told from the perspective of this young fellow called Charles Thomas Tester, who goes on the streets by the name of Tommy Tester, and by the end of the book is Black Tom. He's a con man, failed musician who's struggling to support his father Otis with various assists from a friend of his, Buckeye, who's from more of a kind of the West Indian kind of thing, era of the places. There's differences between the two stories. There's changes in this book. It opens with him delivering this strange yellow book to a white woman, and it's referred to as it gets referred to as the supreme alphabet. But he's ripped out the last page because it's not information that any white woman should ever have. He ends up meeting Robert Suyadam at outside of a cemetery, basically because he's pulling a scam. He's doing his usual scam of he can only play a couple of songs, but he just plays that one song over again, away from his own neighborhood where they'd know he's just a crap musician, and gets hired by Suyadam to come to his mansion to entertain at a party he's given. Suyadam gives him some money, and he immediately gets waylaid by Malone, the detective from the original story. It was actually about here where I went, oh, I'm missing a lot. Googled it and realized it was the H.P. Lovecraft story that this was coming from, and I read that story, and then I went back and then continued reading the novella. And I'll talk about at the end whether I think I recommend you actually read the original story first or not, or if it can be taken on its own. Anyways, the usual thing of what you would expect with how white detectives would treat a black man at this time, or other times, happens. Now there's differences between the two stories, which is interesting because there's a wedding in the original story. There's sort of a cruise. There is no central this Tom Tester in the original story. This is definitely Lavalle's creation, and I don't believe there's any the supreme alphabet either, which is interesting. Now it tells the story from Charles Tommy Tester's perspective, all the way up into the end of part one, and then the other half of the book, part two, is told from Malone's perspective, which is sort of where I kind of went, but that the having Tom's perspective was the thing that was actually making it kind of more of a different story, and I'm slightly puzzled to why we suddenly went back to Malone and what happens to Malone, and that it's there's an interesting shift in the horror, which I guess I can, in some ways I can see why there was a shift, because from the perspective of H.P. Lovecraft, the Nameless Terror is all these horrible, foreign non-white people, whereas very much by the end of the book, from Tom's perspective, yeah, the horror doesn't come from there. It comes from the oppressor, the actual oppressors, the malevolent people. Lovecraft is always talking about the cosmic indifference of things, while Tommy's like, I'll take that indifference versus your active malevolence towards me at all times, at all parts of my life. So, yeah, it was an interesting book that way, in that I didn't know if it particularly, jumping to my, I guess, conclusions, jumping to that part of like, did this book stand on its own from the Terror at Red Hook? In some ways, I think you need to read both to get it what the point of the story is. That there's the H.P. Lovecraft horror, and then there's the Victor LaValle being a black man in America, being an immigrant in America horror, which I guess is why you have something like, you have a figure like Malone in there, because you want to show Malone being horribly frightened of this black man, and in the end showing through Malone's eyes that he cannot stop watching, that yeah, he's made this man a monster. So and it's interesting because I talked about the Supreme Alphabet, which I don't believe shows up in Lovecraft. The Supreme Alphabet seems to be a reference to something that the 5% Nation, or the Nation of Gods and Earths, which is kind of an outbranch of the. It was founded by one of the members of the Nation of Islam in 1964, so long after this story was over. But you could almost see that as one of those things of some outsiders looking in at something like the 5% Nation and going, oh my God, they've got forbidden lore, and being afraid of it becoming kind of the unspeakable terror as well, from a scared outsider white racist perspective. So I don't know if the book really does. I still kind of question whether, I don't know if the book actually stands up on its own. I read last year. I read the Dream-Quest of Vellitt-Boe, which by Kij Johnson, which is her retelling of a H.P. Lovecraft story, the Dream-Quest of the Unknown Kadath, through a female perspective, and it holds with that female perspective all the way through. And it's one of those books where I thought it surpassed the Lovecraft book. Even though actually I then went back and I read the Lovecraft, and I really enjoyed the Lovecraft. And maybe it's a problem of like the Terror of Red Hook. It's Lovecraft, and he's got that intensity. It's racist intensity, but he's got that intensity, and he's got that overblown language, which is. It's the founding kind of language of a lot of pulp, whether people come at it from other writers have used it, like his energy was this kind of racist, xenophobic energy, and unfortunately of that time and continuing on, that kind of fear of other is definitely in horror, in our dark fantasy, and so I enjoyed the book. I wouldn't give it an unqualified success, because I think it wrestled with H.P. Lovecraft, but I don't think it won. If there's such a thing as winning or losing, I don't think it overrode it. I think you need Lovecraft to get this story, to get the full strength of this story. It'd be interesting to someone who just read the Ballad of Black Tom and didn't have the H.P. Lovecraft running around in their head at the same time, whether it would have the same effect. Maybe it would. I just felt that the Lovecraft, maybe because of Lovecraft's unhealthiness and his illness, his sickness, his racism, that gives such a dark black force to his horror that it gives it more power than what is obviously the very genuine anger, but reasoned anger, healthy anger of this book, which is penalizing an author for being too healthy. Wow, that's being a bastard reviewer, I guess. Yeah, but totally going to try more of his books, Victor LaValle's books. Really interested to try more and see what it's like. So yes, more videos later.